one thing I want to speak of is this individual named Julius Malema, who is a plant. He is a white liberal in blackface. He is a very dangerous person. He's an African who is acting as though he is removing or blocking imperialism from Westerners, from Europeans, from the whites, as he calls it. But in reality, all he really is a liberal white woman. He is a liberal white woman pushing the same ideologies and ideas. Yes, we are talking about communism. We are talking about feminism. We are talking about socialism and all those foolish things. We're going to get into it. First, may I acknowledge Paul, who is the first to come in supporting the work. He writes, "Peace to the saints. This live is necessary." And very few have any idea, but they will get a sense as we proceed. He writes, as of 2022, the EFF has more members than the current governing party in South Africa. Yes, and this is not even a representation of the EFF being so great, but it really represents the lack of faith that the South African has in their current political system, and I don't blame them. This represents the disrepair in the psyche of the South African. For of all of the African peoples that I visited, I found that they are those who know least of their history. You speak to someone, they know their tribe. They might even speak the language. They know nothing of the history of their own tribe. They know little of the history of South Africa, especially that which predates them being conquered. It's quite a sad thing. And these are just the facts. This is not hate. This is just the truth. So we're going to go into it. And when we look at the EFF, not only do they not represent the true values of the Black South Africans, which are the overwhelming majority in that nation state, but they are in direct opposition to much of the values that you'll find on the continent of Africa, from the very bottom all the way to the very top, which is to say that Julius Malema is speaking, he's speaking filth that is definitely out of line with the souls of Black folk. Anywhere in the world you see Black folk. So he is, I'm going to expose him today in this call. You'll get to see who he really is. And also you'll see that he is doing the same things that the Western white imperialists do in terms of how they manipulate information. We're going to take a close look. The South Africans do not support EFF and Julius Malema. They support the idea of them being empowered. They support the idea of being lifted out of poverty. And EFF speaks to this, but they don't have the capability or understanding to actually achieve this. We find in our political class, it's often the people who were losers and nerds in high school, and now they get to try to control those of you who would not admire them in high school. They get to control, the women who wouldn't sleep with them in high school, and they gobble up power such that they can, act out on some of the desires they've had their entire life, the desire to get the pretty woman, the desire to have acclaim, fame, control, and influence. He writes, because he has been able to acquire power within the South African society by wearing the cloak of South African nationalists. And indeed, it is a cloak. And we know that this is a cloak because how is it that you could be a nationalist while also being a socialist or communist? But these ideas have typically, come from Europe. Yes, the whites that Malema seems to hate. Yes, your ideas come from those whites. Secondly, when you like to identify imperialism, yes, undoubtedly the French, the British, and many of the other Europeans were imperialists. They conquered and took over territories. Did the communists not do such? Did the Russians not take over other countries and nation states? And we called them satellites of the Soviet Union. Did they not take over? Yes, they did. Nationalists usually, they love and focus on their homeland, the fatherland, or as the silly Africans would say, the motherland. And in focusing on their homeland, they tend to come up with their own ideology. For example, if you would look at a nationalist in Italy called Benito Mussolini, and he had his own ideologist, Giovanni Gentile, and he created a philosophy called fascism. It was something that was created within Italy. Yes, they're nationalists. They're all about Italy. Their philosophy comes from that soil and from Italian minds. But apparently these Blacks can't think of anything in South Africa. So they said, I'll use what the Europeans are using. I'm sure it'll work for us just fine. Yet they claim to be nationalist. Now, just imagine you're a nationalist. What is nationalism about? It's about your nation state. Only nations have flags. Is there a nation state for the LGBTQ? No, they don't have a nation state. They are not a nation. There's no blood associated with that. Perhaps the tainted blood that results from the STIs that they suffer. But there's no blood associated with the LGBTQ. There's no ethnicity, no history, no folkways, no mores, no language, no history. But why do they have a flag? And more importantly, why does a man, a supposed leader, a politician, a leader of a nation state, a nation which does have a flag, why would you wrap yourself in the flag of another nation? Why would you wrap yourself in a flag of evil, a flag that represents deviance? And should we be surprised that the one country that is so firmly behind this filth is the country that long ago was infiltrated by Westerners? Yeah, the white Europeans that went in there, took over as a minority, took over the majority of blacks because they were foolish and friendly. I have a 3-sentence Bible. Number 1, be yourself. Number 2, be good to yourself. Number 3, be good to good people. The blacks the world over have never been smart with this one. Be good to good people. You see, they've been friendly and good to those who would come in, invading them. Yes, not understanding who their friends are, who their enemies are. Oh, the blacks have been very silly. And this is not to speak anything racist toward the black or toward the white. This is merely to speak the facts that have been suppressed, the facts that are unknown to many of you. But anyways, I point out to you that it is no surprise that the African, major air quotes, the African nation that pushes this LGBTQ stuff, the African nation, which is most liberal, most sexually permissive, the African nation, which is actually economically developed, but still has extraordinarily high levels of HIV/AIDS, is the one that supports this LGBTQ stuff. And it should really get you angry and say, how is it that South Africa has such a dynamic, strong economy, but the prevalence of HIV/AIDS is so high? That doesn't make any sense. And furthermore, any nation in sub-Saharan Africa that's suffering such high levels of HIV/AIDS should not at all want to promote anything sexual. Anything sexual. They should be promoting family planning. They should be promoting morality and being chaste, if only for mere survival, such that they don't accidentally eradicate themselves from disease, HIV/AIDS. Just one of the many diseases that the African nation or the African continent suffers as a result in part of their disease ecology, in part as a result of lack of technology, as a result of many things. But instead you promote LGBTQ. And we know that the folks who engage in this deviant sexual behavior, they are more prone to have HIV/AIDS. This is the scientific fact. In fact, in the 1980s, when this was becoming prevalent in the United States, it was thought of as a gay disease because it was occurring so frequently because of the unnatural trauma, the unnatural behavior causing trauma to the anus, the sphincter, and these tissues which do not self-lubricate because they're not meant to receive penetration. And because of the LGBTQ folks not using condoms, which I'm not going to pretend as though heterosexual folks use condoms as much as they should, but because the LGBTQ folks don't use condoms and you're getting tears in the tissue, which causes bleeding, that's why the transmission is so high. So why would you promote such a filthy thing, a dangerous thing, in a continent where you already have high prevalence of HIV/AIDS? It's disgusting, foolish, and irresponsible, especially for a politician. But most importantly, it's out of line with the values of those people. How could we even claim to be democratic or respect democracy? And when democracy yields a particular outcome, you protest it? And here's the most disgusting part about this little rat. This boy's a malnourished, fat, ugly, misshapen little rat. He doesn't even have any eyebrows. Boy looks like he's been suffering cancer his whole damn life. Point is this. What he's protesting is the democratic outcome, the creation of laws